Everybody, my name is Ray Cool. I'm CEO of PBSI Technology Solutions. Thank you for joining for today's important webinar, why a security risk assessment is a must. I'm going to overview the content today. I'll talk quickly because there's a lot of content to cover. Our goal is to review why a risk assessment is so important, what are some of the key elements of a risk assessment, to go through a demonstration of some of the tools that are available to help with performing a risk assessment and also to prevent and mitigate damage if an event does take place. And we'll look at a couple of new tools related to email security that we use at PBSI, and I highly recommend we like to pass on information that we learn through experience. So what I won't do today is to go through the details of a security risk assessment in terms of the step-by-step. My friend and colleague Janet Reed, who is our Director of Security Compliance, provides services and special content for risk assessments. Today, our goal is to identify why is it important, what does it include, and what are some tools that will help us go about performing one. So many of you, thank you very much, have been clients and friends for many, many years. Some of you, this is your first exposure to PBSI. So as way of introduction, we provide security and IT services for hundreds of clients in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, in healthcare and business and nonprofit. And one of the blessings of my work life is to know that we have so many staff. A high percentage of our staff have been with PBSI for many, many years. And I know that knowledge helps clients. So our overall mission is proactive IT security and security monitoring. And so I hope this content is helpful. Our goal today is to inform and educate, not to sell products and services. So you attending a webinar like this are the, quote, smart ones in the room. You know that security is important. And some of you have done a really excellent job over the years, we know, of providing for security and paying attention to this. There's something for everyone to learn. I'm going to do a short demonstration up front that some of you may have seen in the past, but I'm going to do a dark web password exposure check. The reason I'm going to do this is to try and bring home the reality that the world out there is not only dangerous, our emails and those of our friends and colleagues have been compromised. There are 3.1 billion emails that are available for sale on the dark web, and 1.2 billion of them have been exposed. Now, if you do some quick math, this is worldwide information, but this far exceeds the population of the United States. So the fact is, if your password hasn't been exposed, your neighbor may have had 2 passwords exposed. And generally speaking, it's not our fault. You didn't do anything wrong to get your password exposed. You placed, or whoever's been compromised has placed their password and email with a trusted site that has been compromised. LinkedIn, Yahoo, Gmail, DocuSign, just thousands and thousands of sites. Recently, Marriott, Dell, most recently, healthcare.gov, the Obamacare sign-up website, all have been hacked. And as a result, through all of these hacks, the exposures are out there. So what does that mean to us? It means that not only our passwords, but our colleagues and friends, we may receive an increasing number of emails over the year that purport to be from someone we know, but they're not, increasing the importance of security protection and understanding how to prevent and protect our level of risk. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to go to a site where PBSI pays a monthly fee to access this kind of information. I'm now going to query into the dark web that unless you have a Tor browser, you can't get here, thankfully. And the thing I'm going to do is just do a query on what credentials have been compromised for PBSI. I would never use a client or anyone else in a demonstration mode because I've done too many of these queries to know that very surprisingly, or possibly not surprisingly, I dare say the majority of folks connected to this webinar, your password's been exposed. And by the way, new policy, we will now do free internet domain searches for either organizations like yourorganization.com or for individual email addresses for yourself, your friends, family. So if you would like a free internet search done to identify if you had passwords compromised, just send us an email and follow up or contact us anytime. I will tell you the results are scary. So what I just did is I displayed the password exposures that have happened from PBSI employees. Now, some of these employees are no longer living. Some have not been a part of PBSI team for many, many years. The point is the password that was put for sale on this date or on this date may have been compromised years and years ago, but the fact is the password is still exposed. It's still out there for sale. And I can go through page after page with PBSI and you can see real passwords, including the one that used to be my standard password before I realized, oh my gosh, I can't have a standard password because this is very bad. My former standard password was exposed on the internet for years and I didn't know it. So I'm not trying to scare anybody, but do know that we're happy to do this kind of a search for you to identify if any of your passwords have been compromised. So context there is attacks that come into our organizations and into our email inboxes are much more informed and able to be insider clever than they ever used to be. So protection is important. So we're going to talk about security risk assessment. Why is it so important that every organization, so many of you connected today are in a healthcare environment, and this is a critical thing, a required thing for anybody in healthcare. But I want to say for those of you who are not in healthcare, it's just as important. The reasons are slightly different. So for healthcare practices, this is a required step for HIPAA compliance, as it is for PBSI as a business associate of so many healthcare practices. It's the minimum standard of due diligence, meaning we must have done a risk assessment each year and updated it each year. If you haven't done that, if you experience a breach, the lack of having a current risk assessment is an automatic fine. And failure to have a current risk assessment is an automatic failure, or if it's after the fact through an audit, it's an automatic take back of the money that you received. So this is kind of the fear factor. You have to do it, so do it. But there are also very important reasons. So for every one of us, a security event stops the clock, meaning it's really unfortunate. Every time I hear a client's been hacked, they had a ransomware attack, they had a virus that was acquired, I think, oh, that is so frustrating because we've been communicating how to prevent these, what to do about them. And if that happens to you, on that day, you don't have a current risk assessment, the clock is stopped. You cannot go back and redo your risk assessment in advance unless you risk legal issues that probably none of us want to risk. So what is required for compliance? All PCs must have active antivirus, patch management, and vulnerability scanning. There must be monitoring in place of security events, including failed login attempts. We have to have updated security policies and procedures. We have to have an employee security training plan to be able to document what employees have been trained, and we have to have a disaster recovery plan. So in and of themselves, these are not difficult, nor are they expensive, but all of these are required. So for all of us, there is an element of risk protection. So there are safe harbors, which are very difficult to interpret, I will say. And each state has their own safe harbor rules, meaning that if you experience a ransomware attack or a data compromise, you are safe harbored from certain kinds of lawsuits if you have the right kinds of things in place. And certainly the first and foremost of those is a security risk assessment. So failure to identify what your risks are and start working on them in advance is the immediate failure, and the risk goes way up. So one other thing that those of you listening, I would guess that virtually all of you agree, we have, separate from any legal obligation, we have an obligation of integrity. If we own data, that's employee data, client data, patient data, we have an obligation to protect it. So unfortunately, and I'm not finding fault here, I understand this really well, that we sit at our desks and we're too busy to pay attention to this, and yet we realize, I don't know if we in fact are protected, and I know what we should be doing, but are we doing it? I really couldn't say. So what does it mean to take a risk assessment? Basically, we're taking an inventory of processes, people, and technology. So processes are all of our documented procedures, security policies, access controls, compliance policies, business associate agreement, logs, password guidelines, training policy, reporting procedures, logs and forms that we have to have in place, all of the documentation. So PBSI provides templates for many of these things, but the templates, any source of templates for security policies and procedures, we find has to be customized. We find so many examples where somebody purchased, whether from PBSI or from somebody else, security policies and procedures, but they still have generic things in them. They obviously haven't been worked through for that organization. They're not being used. So the policies need to be in place in such a way that you've actually looked at them and paid attention. And again, it's not a difficult process, but it's step number one is to evaluate which policies do we have. And it's real easy to compare the list of policies that should be in place compared to the list that are. And by the way, it doesn't matter what your policy is. For example, password guidelines. You're not required to have a certain strength of password guidelines. Your password guideline could be, we don't require a certain length. We don't require a certain timetable for changing passwords. That's a guideline. If that's your policy, that's your policy. There's no requirement that you have a different policy, but you have to have a policy that's understood and communicated. Okay, then once we have understood what our policies are and where the gaps are where we need to fill those in, we want to take an inventory of people. So we just hired some staff recently who has and who has not received the training called for in our policies and procedures. And one of the difficulties is keeping on top of this. We go through a process periodically where we make sure everybody's been trained, and then it's 6 months later, we really haven't had the procedure in place to make sure every new employee goes through the same training. So I'm going to talk about a tool that's available, and again, inexpensive to do so, called KnowBe4, that provides for employee training with great content, but also auto-documenting the training. Everyone who's been through training, the documentation's automatic, and it's perfect proof for any auditor, plus it's perfect proof for management that in fact each employee has successfully completed training. So do you have documentation of your training process? Processes, people, and then the most difficult for most of us is an inventory of technology. Where do we have protected information, either PHI, protected health information, or personal information, PII, stored on our network? And it's virtually impossible to do this manually, but having an understanding of where unprotected information is, and when I say unprotected, I mean unencrypted. If the data is encrypted, sitting at rest, it's protected. There is no risk, or there's very, very little risk, assuming you have adequate password length, but it's unprotected, unencrypted data where there's risk. So why do we care that there may be on servers or PCs or backup devices? Why do we care that there might be secure information if we haven't been hacked? And the answer is, what if we are hacked? That's when we need to be able to know what to do, know where it might have been compromised. And if we simply say we don't know where all that data was in advance, then we have no way to identify that we haven't been compromised in an important way. So email history, a lot of protected information is stored in emails, emails that we've received, emails that we've sent, attachments in archived emails from 3 years ago, devices that store information. If you fax or you use a copier, that information is typically scanned to a hard drive and stored there forever. What are our procedures about disposal, and what are our policies about cell phones and bring your own devices and digital recorders? All the places where data might be stored, we want and need to do an assessment, so an inventory. So one area here where we can help is we can do an electronic inventory. That's a wonderful thing. It finds every piece of unprotected PHI. That's called a data breach risk intelligence scan. That can be done one time or it can be done ongoing. So the question here is also, are our laptops, our portable devices that are more at risk than desktop devices, are they encrypted? It's a requirement of HIPAA. And we find it's a difficult thing to comply with and to document compliance, or our wireless security controls and our firewall rules and our backup security, any backup devices, tapes or cartridges that we've had in the past, are they encrypted? Where are they? Do we know that we haven't lost any? This is all the process of an inventory. Also remote access control. So how many folks connect remotely into our database inside the office? If they're connecting to a web server like EHR on the web, that isn't a part of your assessment, but if they connect to their PC in your office or to your network, then we need to understand what kind of protection is existing and what are our required policies for protecting home PCs. Many years ago, many years ago, Microsoft reported that the source code to Windows was stolen. And this was a long time ago. I'm sure that would never happen today, but it happened because an employee had their home PC compromised, and a keylogger on their home PC allowed the hacker to follow the employee into the secure network and access the remotest, most secure parts of Microsoft's network, securing devices that log in remotely. And then, are our protection tools up to date? Do we in fact have active current antivirus, patch management, firewalls, intrusion prevention? I'll talk a little bit about these tools today, but these are the basic blocking and tackling of electronic protection. Are these things in place? And then finally, risk assessment is the initiation point for creating a plan. So we start by creating a log of security actions needed. Here are the areas where we've asked the questions and we find out we either don't know the answer or the answer we know is inadequate. That goes on our to-do list. Now, we don't have to take care of everything on the to-do list. We simply need to have a list of where the gaps in our security are, and we need to be able to demonstrate that we are on a routine basis taking some action. If an auditor comes in and finds out that you did a risk assessment and you had all kinds of security holes and you fixed 2 or 3 of them, the most important ones, and you're in process of fixing others, you're going to have a much different, more positive reaction from that auditor than one where you've never recorded any events or you don't have logs in place. That is an indicator of an environment where we haven't really taken this process of a risk assessment seriously. And that includes documenting training activities. So risk assessment is a one-time event in that you do it once a year, you update it once a year, but it is not a one-time event. It's a process of culture where now somebody's responsible, a named person, your security compliance officer is responsible to update, report, and take action and recommend to management the actions that need to be taken to fill the gaps in our most recent risk assessment. So that's the process. We take an inventory and then we create an action plan. So what does it mean to assess the security? So basically, we're going to assess our perimeter security, our desktop security, our network monitoring, our disaster recovery, and our employee training. These are among the keys. This isn't an entire exclusive list, but perimeter, every organization should have a firewall. This blocks traffic coming in that otherwise would be able to ping every device on your network asking, what version of Windows do you have? What version of Microsoft Office? Looking for incidences where patches haven't been updated. There's a version of Microsoft Office on one PC that there's a security fix long ago, but it hasn't been updated. And now the hacker, because there's no firewall there, can ping the PC directly and try and attack on that PC that can be automated, trying to get under the surface to see if they can get network access. The firewall that blocks all those pings would have prevented any of those individual pings from ever getting through. So there's more to it. There's inspection of traffic in both directions and threat protection that's going on at a firewall level. So the perimeter security means we've taken the appropriate steps to protect our network from things going on the internet. Desktop security, at a PC level, every PC needs antivirus that's active and updated all the time, and patch management, meaning that each application on the PC, whether from Microsoft or Apple or Adobe or whoever the vendor is, if a security patch is updated, it needs to be accepted automatically, updated automatically, reboots done automatically if they're required. And this is something that for many of you, we already provide this set of services for you in what we call online security monitoring, where we provide antivirus, patch management, vulnerability scanning, alerting, and we take care of all the issues on your PCs without your even knowing that we're doing that, but we're paying attention and getting the alerts to make sure that all this is in place. If that process isn't in place in your organization, whether you use PBSI is not the point here. The point is that it's important that these things are in place. And again, at a network security assessment, we're identifying where the holes are. So network monitoring, security monitoring isn't just for PCs, it's also for other things. So the Internet of Things is increasingly prevalent. switches, wireless access points, UPSs, refrigerators, temperature sensors, doorbells, cameras, televisions, the general category of the Internet of Things. There's just a proliferation on a massive scale of these devices entering our offices and our homes. And if we do things like we leave default passwords in place, we're opening up our network. So understanding whether we have any of those and what kind of protection we've taken place is a part of an assessment. So this other item, data breach risk intelligence, this is a scan that we can do. And we do this for maybe 20, 25% of our clients. We should be doing it for 100%, in my opinion. This is a scan that can be done once or on an ongoing basis. This is what automatically will find every incidence of unprotected, meaning unencrypted data on your network that includes PHI or PII. And it's a brilliant solution for taking an electronic inventory, because if you've ever thought, I want to go to a PC and sit down there and use File Explorer to find out where the PHI might be on this machine, forget it. It's you might find it in the documents folder, but will you find it in the email archive or the folders that were named by a former employee 5 years ago, but the data still sits there? Electronic intelligence is a brilliant thing. It's inexpensive and a really good idea as a part of an assessment. A disaster recovery plan is also required as a part of a risk assessment, which mostly, for most of us, it's having an online backup that is weapons grade encrypted, meaning it's protected from ransomware, and a fail-safe that if our building blew up and our network was completely compromised with ransomware, we have a copy of all the relevant data that we could start in business on a defined short notice time period. It's actually required by HIPAA. So disaster recovery isn't just online backup, but online backup is the most essential element for most of us. Employee training, this again is an area where it's difficult for everyone, and I recommend a tool like KnowBe4, which is a product that we use. It's content that's created by a third party. We resell this product. It's $3 a month per employee to have this training done, and it's really worthwhile because there's tons and tons of content, including HIPAA training documentation, HIPAA training videos with quizzes, and we just went through the process at PBSI, where even though hopefully we have a security culture and everybody's been trained about HIPAA for years and years, every year we do this, everybody received an email a couple months ago from Janet Reed that says you have 60 days to go through this and answer the quiz, and Janet just sent out an email a few days ago saying, congratulations, everybody completed the training, and we have that permanent documentation, and all it required was a few minutes of setup in KnowBe4. Janet would probably disagree with me. Well, there's a little more to it, but automating the training and automating the documentation of training is a straightforward thing. Okay, so these are the things, some of the tools that we go about. I'll do a short demonstration of some of these, but I'll mention that there are some other security elements that bear attention. So I mentioned Internet of Things. Change your default passwords. That's the key thing to do. Phones, today, hacks don't just come by email. More and more frequently, unfortunately, you probably see they come by text, they come by phone call. Phone calls are called vishing. I guarantee Microsoft will not call you personally to see if your computer is running slowly, nor will they call you, nor will any other reasonable organization, other than a bank with a credit card fraud may call you, but you will not receive phone calls. And particularly if the phone call has the first 3 digits, your area code, and the first 3 digits that match your number, it's almost always a scam, and I recommend just don't answer it and block it. So we have to keep diligent to make sure that our mobile devices are protected as well. So privacy settings is another thing. Over here on the right-hand side of my screen, this is a setting choice in Windows 10 that I have this question: do you want to use advertising to give it permissions to get information on your computer and allow websites? By default, you install Windows 10. These are both set to on. So in Windows 10 settings, privacy, turn these off. it's difficult, but fortunately, an organization like PBSI or whoever else you use for your security, these are pretty basic standard blocking and tackling things, but you need to be able to document and then make the security settings that are appropriate. And so one other security thing, avoid software downloads. This is a long standing thing, but there are so many free download sites, music, movies, screensavers. Just stay away from software downloads and make that a policy in your organization. So these are some other things that are just important, but not necessarily at the center of a risk assessment. So I'm going to do a short demonstration now of some of the components. How can the tools that I'm showing here on the left-hand side of my screen help with a risk assessment and then with ongoing risk protection? So antivirus, patch management, and vulnerability scanning. These are the three basics of PC security, in addition to monitoring of alerts. So HIPAA requires that we monitor failed logins. That's something that's difficult to do without a security monitoring tool. And then how do we do network device monitoring on things other than PCs, switches and firewalls and so forth? And then what happens when we do a data breach risk intelligence scan, and what can we learn about backup status? So I'm going to go to PBSI's, I get to the right place here. I'm going to go to PBSI's monitoring dashboard. And among the list of all clients that display on the left and right-hand or left-hand side of the screen, I've selected just PBSI. So on the right-hand side of the screen, only servers at PBSI show up here on the top. And if I click on a particular server, the elements that are being monitored and managed for that server display on the bottom. If I go to workstations, it's the same thing. Generally speaking, the things that are monitored for servers and PCs are very similar. There are some performance things that are monitored on a server that aren't necessarily monitored as closely on a PC. But at the top of the screen, these are all the PCs at PBSI, and I'm going to do a search to only select any PCs that have the name Ray. So there's my Microsoft Surface. We can see what all things are being reported on my Surface. I'm going to pick my desktop, and these are the things being reported on my desktop. So what happens is there's a monitoring agent that gets installed on a PC, and it will start by doing an assessment. It will find all of the elements that should be in place that aren't in place. So the idea of green, yellow, red, all of these PCs show green in this left-hand column. A monitoring technician at PBSI is not going to look, how's Ray's PC, how's Janet's PC, how's Karen's PC? No, they're not doing that. Instead, if there's an alert that takes place, it comes to the top of the dashboard and it alerts them. So when an event occurs, they don't have to go looking for it. But if they want to then say, what's the status of Ray's PC, they can identify. So Ray has enough disk space. All of these service checks that are supposed to be running are running successfully. The antivirus is in place. It's up to date. There are no current logging events that need to be reported, no failed logins. We find on some servers and PCs, if we have a client without a firewall, against our recommendation, no firewall, we'll find failed logins way too frequently, meaning there is an attack, usually not intentional. Somebody's not at a keyboard trying to attack that PC, but these are automated scripts that try all kinds of standard password combinations to try and log in and get access. What other critical events are being monitored? Is backup running successfully? Are patches okay? So if there's one missing patch on Ray's PC, this is missing, that's okay. We have these updated twice a week. So a dashboard technician could go manually and say, let's approve that one and get that updated right away. But otherwise, this is an automatic thing. For those of you who are unfamiliar with patch management, it's the very important process of making sure that all software on this PC is getting its security updates automatically. What we find is dozens of times per week, if not more, that what should be automated doesn't work correctly. It's not unusual to select a PC and see something here like patch update failed, which requires manual intervention. That's the kind of thing that without monitoring being done on your behalf, you may have one or some examples on your network where you think you have an automated patch management in place, but the protection isn't there and it puts that device at risk. So I can see the Virus status of Raise PC, everything's okay there. Technician can see how much RAM and what other hardware is on Raise PC, but the important thing is looking at all of the elements of security and making sure everything's okay. So I'm going to go on from this to identify what else is going on Raise PC. Well, there's a risk intelligence scan that goes on every night, and I'm going to see the status of the most recent risk intelligence scan. This is something, again, you can do one time, which tells you all the places on your network that unencrypted, protected information exists. So I'm going to look at the most recent data breach scan on Raise PC and review the results. And this is, again, something you would never do one PC at a time. Is this one okay? Is this one okay? Not at all. You do the scan, and then there's a report that comes out that says, here are all the PCs with unprotected or servers, unprotected information, and there's a value of each set of data. On my PC, it sees probably some MasterCard. I say probably because it's looking for the format of a typical MasterCard number, some Social Security numbers, and some dates of birth. And a piece of data has more value if there's more data together. So if there's a date of birth and a social and a credit card number and a name, then that's worth more than something that just has a name and a credit card number, so forth. So the manual process of review, you can go down and see here is something in an old email file, an OST, in Raise sent mail that was a zip code report. And when I sent that, I included the encryption option, but you know what? In my sent mailbox, it sits there unencrypted. So the scan found it. So here's an Excel file. I won't do more than a couple of these that in fact I do keep out there. It's in my on my PC, and it's called document name is dummy SS numbers not encrypted. Well, yeah, I put it there on purpose, and sure enough, the risk scan finds it every night and tells me I have something that needs mitigation. So it's not unusual if we do this for a transcriptionist PC or a billing manager that may have reports with Social Security numbers, that there may be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of value stored in unencrypted form on a particular PC. So the point isn't necessarily that we have to encrypt it all, we have to get rid of it all. The point is knowing where it is and understanding, making a decision. It's okay to keep that there or it's not. That's the process where a security assessment is important to learn about that. Okay, so I'm going to move on from there, and I won't look at network device monitoring, but know that we can see the status of switches. Are all the ports working? Is there a port block? And that would be an indicator that there's a lot of traffic coming through that block that would be automatically turned off, which is an indicator that there may be a ransomware or some kind of virus attack that's going on the PC connected to that switch. It's just interesting how things can be learned by the monitoring of devices that novices, and I include myself in that, I'm not a technician, were surprised. Okay, we just looked at data breach risk intelligence. The last thing I'm going to look at here is the status of online backup. So any device that's being backed up online, and here's a server at PBSI that's being backed up, what we want to see is a green line on top of every day. We keep the last 28 days of data separately for each one of these devices, and we can see how much data was backed up that day, how long it took to back up, and we can go back and recover files from any of these dates. So this is a part of weapons grade backup. So what happens is a two-step process that every night there is a local copy that's backed up to a removable drive, and it's encrypted, so ransomware can't get to it. Also, that same data is backed up to the cloud and kept for 28 days. So I know with a very high level of certainty that if our network was attacked and destroyed completely, that we could go back and recover every piece of data. And that's the value of the right kind of online backup. This can be done for servers, it can be done for PCs. And many of you I know, again, I say this without criticism, at PBSI we have a policy, no company documents on C drives. That means nothing. If it's a personal document, you have your resume, fine, put it on your C drive. But if it's any kind of a document related to our practice or organization, we have a policy, and generally we follow up, and I think with 90-some% success, we really don't have data on C drives. unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, it's a really difficult process to have that done and completely followed. Therefore, if you have PCs where you think there's important information, your policies and procedures are stored on the office manager's PC, you can have individual PCs backed up, and it's really a good idea. It's so frustrating when we see a ransomware attack, a PC is destroyed, and the backup's not there. It's just so unavoidable. Enough said. Okay, I'm going to move on now. We're almost finished. We will be finished before our 1 o'clock deadline. I'm going to do a quick demonstration of something that's really unrelated to a risk assessment, but it's so important I want to present this information. So PBSI used to use an in-house Exchange server where all of our mail and calendars and so forth were stored on a server in-house. We changed to Office 365 in the cloud, and the primary reason we did that, our Exchange server was working fine, we did it to take advantage of this new option that wasn't available prior that adds $2 a month for every employee called Advanced Threat Protection. I'm going to demonstrate a couple things about how this works. The basic idea of Advanced Threat Protection is, since all email traffic is being routed to a Microsoft server in the cloud, adding this Advanced Threat Protection adds a routing stop that every email, when I click on a link or I click on an attachment, instead of delivering the result to me, which might be a virus, instead it sandbox detonates it in the cloud before it ever gets to the email server, and instead of receiving a virus, I receive a message that says this was malicious. And if you've ever had a ransomware attack, this, based on Microsoft's documentation, we're all trusting this, prevents ransomware attacks that come through email clicks. So here's a message. It says this website has been classified as malicious. That's one kind of warning. And here's a diagram of how this works, that the traffic is routed through a sandbox and a message is delivered back. So I'm going to go to my own inbox at PBSI. And I'm going to show an example here of something that just came to me this morning. It's a great example. So a client called me when I was doing webinar preparation this morning and said, hey, I got an email from a former employee and I can't open the email. And he had said enough. I said, before you do anything else with that, why don't you forward that to me? So he did. And the email that I got from him had an attachment. And I knew that he couldn't open this attachment safely, but I did. And here's what happened. Malicious. This, if that attachment had been opened successfully on a PC, I don't know what the malicious content is that would have been delivered, but I guarantee it's way better to get this message. So it prevented damage because of this $2 a month feature. So another just a quick example of the same thing. It does the same thing with links. So our security administrator, Dane, sent to me this email that had a known bad link. He said, check this out and how this works. When that link is clicked on, same thing, malicious website, it's a different site. But I'd much rather get a warning than I would a virus or a ransomware attack. So that is Advanced Threat Protection. Well worth the cost. And there are ways to get there. If you already have Office 365, we can tell you how to add it. We can help any organization if you wish. There are some complications in doing it, but we've learned all about it. So, end of demonstration. I'm going to summarize. So what have we talked about related to a security risk assessment? One, make sure you have a current assessment. And if you have areas where you can't successfully answer the question, we have antivirus and malware protection, patch management, vulnerability scanning, and the right policies in place, then those would be on your to-do list. Knowing where your unprotected data is a part of doing an inventory, and it can be done electronically with a risk intelligence scan. Knowing that your backups are in place and that they're secure. There may be some of you who are listening where we provided a server to you 10 years ago or more, and we included on-site backup where you have a removable cartridge or a removable tape. Today, we recommend all clients replace that backup methodology with online backup. Yes, you pay a monthly fee, but it's so superior because the backup's encrypted, it's duplicated. So unless you're a part of the process is make sure your backup is secure and you're comfortable with the level of protection. Make sure you have a process for identifying alerts if something goes wrong, and then make sure that training is in place. So since we have just a couple of minutes, I'm going to go do one other thing. I won't really demonstrate this, but I will show you PBSI's site for KnowBe4. Yeah, here it is on the screen. So this screen is the result with 100% completion of the training, HIPAA training email that was sent to all employees at PBSI, and it was sent in December, and some people did it right away, and we can find out exactly which users did it on December 24th and 31st, and then Janet started sending out reminder emails saying, you have to complete this. Hey, you guys who haven't completed this, they need to. And finally, then she sent an email saying, everybody's completed it, way to go. And we can look at each person who completed it, and we know if they passed the exam or not. So here's your documentation for a HIPAA auditor. And as far as the items that can be included, they can be, this was a HIPAA training video, but there's so much content that's available by KnowBe4, both for phishing tests and training activities and training tests on a variety of topics, PCI training, just all kinds of content. KnowBe4 is just fantastic in creating good training content. So again, it's not the only choice for training, but we found an inexpensive way that auto documents. So these are some of the action steps that you might consider. So we're finished with content. I want to thank you for your attendance. Again, many of you have been clients and friends for a long, long time. You're much appreciated. Hopefully this has been helpful.